Criminal informants in Buffalo, NY, exploiting vulnerable victims. In Buffalo, New York, a disturbing trend has emerged where criminal informants target victims of sexual abuse and domestic violence. These informants exploit the vulnerability of these victims to gather information about the criminal enterprises their abusers are involved in. However, the consequences for the victims are far more severe than just the initial abuse. Exploitation and financial victimization. Victims, already traumatized by their experiences, find themselves further victimized financially. Informants, often working with law enforcement, use the information provided by these victims to build cases against criminal enterprises. However, the lack of oversight and proper casework means that these victims are left unprotected and unsupported. This creates a cycle of exploitation, where victims are used as pawns in a larger game of criminal justice, without regard for their well-being. One of the most troubling aspects of this exploitation is the financial victimization. Informants, who are often involved in criminal activities themselves, have been found to scam victims out of their money. They promise protection or legal assistance in exchange for financial compensation, only to disappear once they have received the money. This leaves victims in an even more precarious financial situation, unable to support themselves or seek the help they need. Moreover, these informants can use their connections within criminal enterprises to further exploit victims. They may sell the information provided by victims to other criminals, leading to further victimization and danger for the victims. The financial exploitation extends beyond the immediate loss of money, as it often results in long-term financial instability and stress for the victims. Lack of oversight and victim support. Federal programs designed to support victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse are supposed to provide comprehensive assistance, including legal aid, counseling, and financial support. However, the lack of oversight in these programs has led to significant gaps in support. Victims are often unaware of their rights and the resources available to them, leaving them susceptible to further exploitation. The lack of oversight is a systemic issue that affects all levels of victim support. At the federal level, there is a lack of coordination between different agencies and programs, leading to gaps in service provision. Victims often have to navigate a complex and confusing system to access the support they need, which can be overwhelming and discouraging. At the local level, there is often a lack of training and resources for those working with victims. Caseworkers may not have the necessary knowledge or skills to provide adequate support, leading to gaps in service provision. Additionally, there is often a lack of accountability for those who exploit victims. Informants who financially exploit victims are rarely held accountable, leaving victims without recourse. This lack of oversight and support creates an environment where victims are vulnerable to exploitation. Without proper oversight, federal programs are unable to provide the comprehensive support that victims need. This leaves victims to navigate the complex and often dangerous world of criminal justice on their own, without the necessary support and protection. The role of criminal informants. Criminal informants play a crucial role in the criminal justice system. They provide valuable information that can lead to the arrest and prosecution of criminals. However, their role is often controversial, as they are often involved in criminal activities themselves, and may exploit their position for personal gain. In Buffalo, informants have been found to exploit victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse to gather information about criminal enterprises. This exploitation is often done under the guise of providing protection or legal assistance, but it ultimately serves to further the informant's own interests. This creates a conflict of interest, as informants are motivated by personal gain rather than the well-being of the victims. Informants may also use their connections within criminal enterprises to further exploit victims. They may sell the information provided by victims to other criminals, leading to further victimization and danger for the victims. This creates a dangerous cycle of exploitation, where victims are used as pawns in a larger game of criminal justice. The use of informants is a complex issue that requires careful oversight and regulation. While informants can provide valuable information, their role must be carefully monitored to prevent exploitation and abuse. Without proper oversight, informants can become a tool of exploitation rather than a tool of justice. Impact on victims. The impact of this exploitation on victims is profound. Victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse are already traumatized by their experiences, and the exploitation by informants only serves to further this trauma. Financial victimization can lead to long-term financial instability and stress, which can have a significant impact on a victim's mental health and well-being. The lack of support and oversight means that victims are often left to navigate the criminal justice system on their own. This can be overwhelming and discouraging, leading to a sense of hopelessness and despair. Victims may feel abandoned by the very system that is supposed to protect and support them, leading to further trauma and isolation. Mental health and suicide risk. The exploitation by informants has severe mental health consequences for victims. Many victims experience feelings of despair and hopelessness, which can lead to suicidal thoughts and attempts. Studies have shown that victims of exploitation and abuse are at a higher risk of depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD). These mental health conditions are strongly associated with self-harm and suicidal behaviors. In addition to the financial exploitation, victims often experience further mental and emotional abuse at the hands of these informants. Emotional abuse can take the form of constant criticism, manipulation, and control, which can further damage a victim's mental well-being. This type of abuse can be just as damaging as physical abuse, leaving lasting scars on the victim's psyche. Case studies and personal stories. The stories of these victims are heart-wrenching. Many have shared their experiences of being coerced into providing information, only to find themselves financially ruined and without the support they desperately need. These personal accounts highlight the urgent need for better oversight and support systems for victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse. One such story is that of Maria, a victim of domestic violence who was coerced into providing information about her abuser's criminal activities. Maria was promised protection and legal assistance in exchange for her cooperation, but she never received the help she was promised. Instead, she was financially exploited by the informant, leaving her in a precarious financial situation. Maria's story is just one of many that highlight the urgent need for better oversight and support for victims. Another story is that of John, a victim of sexual abuse who was exploited by an informant for financial gain. John was promised legal assistance and protection, but he was instead scammed out of his money. The informant used John's information to further their own interests, leaving John without the support he desperately needed. John's story is a stark reminder of the dangers of informant exploitation. These personal stories highlight the urgent need for better oversight and support for victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse. Without proper oversight, victims are left vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, leading to further trauma and victimization. Call to action. It is imperative for law enforcement agencies and federal programs to implement stricter oversight and provide comprehensive support to victims. This includes ensuring that victims are fully informed of their rights and the resources available to them, as well as providing robust casework to protect them from further exploitation. First and foremost, there must be stricter oversight of informants. Law enforcement agencies must implement comprehensive guidelines and protocols for the use of informants, ensuring that they are properly monitored and held accountable for their actions. This includes regular audits and reviews of informant activities, as well as strict penalties for those who exploit victims. Secondly, federal programs must provide comprehensive support for victims. This includes legal aid, counseling, and financial support, as well as education and awareness programs to ensure that victims are fully informed of their rights and the resources available to them. Additionally, there must be better coordination between different agencies and programs to ensure that victims receive the comprehensive support they need. Finally, there must be greater accountability for those who exploit victims. Informants who financially exploit victims must be held accountable for their actions, and victims must have access to legal recourse. This includes the implementation of victim protection programs, as well as stricter penalties for those who exploit victims. Conclusion: the exploitation of victims by informants is a serious issue that requires immediate action. Without proper oversight and support, victims are left vulnerable to further exploitation and abuse, leading to long-term trauma and financial instability. It is imperative for law enforcement agencies and federal programs to implement stricter oversight and provide comprehensive support to victims, ensuring that they are protected and supported.